let's talk about making babies in Star Trek. Well, this video's not going to get monetized, is it? Hi, Rick here, and throughout Trek we often meet a variety of characters, some even main cast members, who are of 2, sometimes even 3 species parentage. We, as humans, share most of our DNA with the other species on this planet, from other animals to vegetables, and we cannot create a human-broccoli hybrid. So, in a sci-fi universe as big as Trek's, how come there are so many different species of alien out there to meet who share our emotional values and physical form enough to create a sense of attraction, even love? This is where I say something sappy about the heart wants what it wants or love conquers all, but a blanket statement like that has too many caveats to be true, and I'm pretty sure I have a lump of coal where my heart should be, so I'm not. Instead, what gets me curious is why so many of these aliens from completely different worlds, some of which don't even share iron-based blood, exchange DNA to create healthy offspring. There are also numerous contradictions within the series, or issues that you'd think would also be a problem, such as Vulcans and Romulans sharing a common ancestor, yet being unable to share blood transfusions, but they can have kids. There is the existence of the precursor ancestor, the hyper-advanced species who originally travelled throughout the Milky Way and seeded early life-bearing worlds with the humanoid form as a genetic template to evolve towards. This has created a common link between many of the species in the galaxy and is used as an in-universe reason for the prolific humanoid form. Undoubtedly, this plays a large factor in the production of viable hybrid species. So let's take a look at some of these characters in the lore that are confirmed to be the product of interspecies, YouTube unfriendly dance routines. Humans and Betazoids. This seems to be a relatively uncomplicated affair. Lwaxana Troi, daughter of the 5th house, holder of the sacred Chalice of Rix. That's where my chalice went. Anyway, she was the mother of Deanna Troi and Kestra, whose father was a human Starfleet officer, Ian Andrew Troi. On top of this, Deanna went on to have 2 children with William Riker, Kestra and Thaddeus. One of which, Thaddeus, did develop an illness, however the cause of this was a silicon-based virus. There was also an officer, Lieutenant Junior Grade Walter Pierce, who was 1/4 Betazoid. It seemed that even people with only 1/4 of Betazed DNA in their lineage are still capable of some telepathic or empathic feats, although these lessen the further from the telepathic ancestry they get. Human Klingons. B'Elanna Torres is probably the first who comes to mind. She was the daughter of Miral, daughter of Lanun, and John Torres. But there was also Alexander Rozhenko's mother, Kayla. She had a child with Worf of House Moch, leading to the 3/4 Klingon Alexander. Torres also conceived a child with fellow crewman Tom Paris, which she named Miral after her mother. With Miral, there was an issue with a curved spine that required some in utero therapy, which was due to her Klingon DNA. However, her full Klingon grandmother Miral had the same issue. So we see that this is not the result of her being 1/4 Klingon, but a familial issue. Apart from the cranial ridges, which appear to be a very dominant gene, there seemed to be few issues in conceiving a child between Klingons and humans. However, the Klingon temperament, strength and aggression would be passed on to the children in varying degrees. There are also examples of Klingon Romulans, such as Bael from the Romulan world of Karaya 4. Again, the Klingon genes appear to be dominant, and with the variation in cranial ridges in Klingons, there were generally no outward signs that she was a hybrid. As with other Klingon mixes, she retained the deepened aggression, but spent much of her life suppressing or unaware of it. Humans and Vulcans. Probably one of the first pairings that came to mind, and with good reason. Spock, the most famousest of all the Vulcans, was a half-Vulcan, half-human mix. His father, Sarek, was the Federation Vulcan ambassador and, as such, thought it a logical idea to marry a human woman as a symbol of unity, and totally not because he loved her. No, that would have been an emotion. Spock is not alone in this regard, however. We have one of the earliest mixes in Elizabeth, the daughter of T'Pol and Trip Tucker in 2155. Unfortunately, the child died, and the cause originally suspected to be incompatibilities in the DNA, but in truth it was just poor cloning on behalf of the organisation that made her. With Vulcan-human hybrids, the Vulcan DNA seems to be almost entirely dominant. Vulcan copper-based blood usurped the human's iron, and the internal physiology being entirely Vulcan. They also retained the entirety of Vulcan abilities, strength, telepathy, the electromagnetic field, Katra, the lot. Perhaps the only inherited human traits were psychological, a lessened emotional control, or perhaps even greater emotional control. It's hard to tell with Vulcans. Romulans and Vulcans can also produce mixed species offspring. One example is Commodore O of Starfleet Security, who was able to pass as a Vulcan for her entire Starfleet career, suggesting again that Vulcan traits are dominant, as she too retained the full use of Vulcan abilities. However, her emotional control was merely a facade, and she fully embraced Romulan ideals. Romulans and humans were compatible too, with Sela. Her mother was an alternate timeline Tasha Yar and an unnamed Romulan general. This general fell in love with Yar and spared the crew of the Enterprise C if she became his consort. Sela was born a year later and got her mother killed during an escape attempt. With Sela, we can see that the Romulan heritage is in fact taking a back seat. Sela has blonde hair, I think a trait completely unseen in Vulcans and Romulans, as well as a lack of brow ridges. However, that last fact may be just down to the general being a southern Romulan, who lacked the angled brow. She did have pointy ears, however, a trait that would be shared by another Romulan-human hybrid, crewman Simon Tarsis. Due to lingering Federation-Romulan tensions, Tarsis had lied on his Starfleet application, saying that he was in fact 1/4 Vulcan, not Romulan. This sort of suggests that although the Vulcans and Romulans are different enough to read as differing species, add some human to the gene soup, and it makes it a lot more difficult to tell based on cursory scans. There is also the unborn child of Gabriel Huang and Pell in 2399, who would be a half human, half Romulan. Although Pell was visiting a prenatal clinic, she didn't seem overly concerned, so I don't think there's an issue here. Cardassians and Bajorans. The Cardassian occupation of Bajor led to a large amount of war orphans and hybrid children, such as Tora Ziyal. From what we can see, Ziyal, who adopted much Bajoran culture, retained traits of both Cardassian and Bajoran physiology, namely the Bajorian nose, coupled with some more smoothed out Cardassian ridges. Another hybrid, from the same father, Dukat, was born in 2375, although the mother was a follower of his Par-Wraith cult, Mika. There were no medical complications during the pregnancy, so it seems that Cardassians and Bajorans are compatible. Cardassians and Kazon. Well, this is even more far-flung, showing that those ancestors that spread the humanoid form really didn't skimp on the fringes of the galaxy. All the way in the Delta Quadrant, Seska, a Cardassian woman, produced a child with first Marge colour of the Kazon Nistrum. The child appeared outwardly to lack many of the Kazon characteristics, but apparently these would develop later in life. Naomi Wildman is a human and a Qatarian. She was the first Federation citizen born in the Delta Quadrant to xenobiologist Ensign Samantha Wildman and Grezkrendtregek. Guess which one isn't human? This one did come with complications, however, as the Qatarian has forehead horns, and the human female is ill-equipped to deal with that. On top of this, the infant Naomi was raised in a sterile starship environment and fell ill when the crew was stranded by the Kazon on a desert world. Although this would likely have happened to any species' baby. The Katarians also had a shorter adolescence, and this was shared by Naomi, who aged to approximately a human, 8-year-old, in 3 years. We also have Tala, an Andorian-Anar hybrid, which is less unexpected really, as the Andorians and Anar shared a homeworld and were even closer than most other species on this list. There are also a surprising number of children being the products of abandoned timelines and universes where characters had settled down and got swifty. Brota, a Klingon Trill hybrid, seems to be an exception to the dominant Klingon appearance genes, as he lacked forehead ridges altogether, so either it's a rare occurrence of recessive gene pairs, or Trill DNA is even more dominant than Klingons. In another timeline, Worf had another daughter with Troy, Shannara. This never came to pass in the Prime reality, but was chronicled in TNG's Parallels. There was also Yedrin Dax, a human Trill mix from an alternate timeline who must have had enough Trill in him to support a symbiont. This isn't as surprising as it first appears, as we've already established that Trill DNA may be dominant, but also a human can act as a temporary host for a symbiont in the short term to keep it alive, so there's already some crossover in there somewhere. Enterprise had an entire time-displaced alternate crew in The Expanse, which had a human Vulcan captain in Lorian. His father was Charles Tucker and mother T'Pol, the same DNA coupling that was used to create Elizabeth. In this timeline, Phlox also hooked up with another wife in Amanda Cole and had 9 half-Denobulan children. Archer had a human and Karian child, and the chain culminated in Karen Archer, who was mixed with 2 other species. Without ever meeting an Ikarian, we can't really judge how much she resembles her mother, but the general rule when adding human DNA seems to be take the alien traits and dial them down a notch. We have a Voyager timeline glimpsed by Kess that saw her have a child with Tom Paris, which would have made her an Acumpan human. She shared the rapid life cycle of an Acumpan and had slight signs of the Acumpa ears, but apart from this, inherited mostly human traits. There are a multitude of other mentioned hybrids and many that appear from one-time species, so it seems that in Star Trek, many aliens are close enough genetically to mate despite all the improbabilities that entails. Not to mention the time where Trip got knocked up by another alien without his consent in Enterprise, or when that happened to Troy too. But in these 2 instances, I think the child was all of a single species. Of course, most of these may have come with medical complications that were glossed over, or abundant amounts of gene therapy or augmentation to allow for a viable contraception, but this was not acknowledged or denied. And considering the Federation's stance on genetics, I don't know. Plus, there are times like when Worf's foster brother knocked up the Baralan Dobar, and considering the Baralans were in a societal equivalent of the medieval period, I doubt they had access to extensive genetic technology. All in all, most species in Star Trek seem compatible no matter how absurd it seems. I place this as a conscious choice from that common humanoid precursor. After all, they intended all their populated species to come together, hopefully in peaceful cooperation, so making them all compatible could be seen as another way to ensure that. In instances where there are 2 incompatible physiologies, often one seems to take complete dominance over the other, like in Vulcan pairings. Other times, the 2 seem mostly on even footing, resulting in a blend of traits, such as Klingons and humans, while some have very recessive traits, like apparently the Romulan genome. Of course, species should not be conflated with culture, and a child of 2 worlds often faces some tough choices. Will they be accepted by one, both, or be shunned, like Zial was? In purely the survival of intelligent life, however, it seems that love conquers all, and that life finds a way. You know, that was something soppy, wasn't it? I said I wouldn't do that. I'm gonna go now. I've been Rick. Goodbye.